What's that? You want to be scared? Come with me. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Listen in the dark. It's more fun that way. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my friends. I'm Henrik Kuto, and thank you for joining me yet again for a couple of chills to run up your spine. And of course, I especially appreciate it because you need no help having a chilled spine right about now. If you're in the majority of the United States of America, where I am right now, it is 23 degrees, and the furnace has shut off very, very rarely, my friends. So welcome to this chilling and chilly episode of Weekly Spooky, and we've got a good one tonight. I'm trying to stay in the theme of the holiday season because I absolutely love holidays, at least fun ones. I mean, I don't think there probably won't be a Ramadan special Weekly Spooky, but there's definitely going to be a Christmas special, and there's definitely going to be a New Year's special, and of course Halloween, obviously, probably an Easter special, 4th of July, why the heck not? We go for the fun. But the thing that I love about Christmas is the early tradition of ghost stories. So the stories you hear this month are going to either be ghost stories or they're going to be directly related to Christmas. And this story may or may not be a ghost story. I'm not going to spoil it for you. But it's pretty creepy, and it's about expectation, fear, and putting yourself out there. I know, right? It sounds kind of heady. Well, it kind of is. This one is so believable in many ways that it really gets to me. So without further ado, I think it's about time we get to tonight's story. And I'll talk to you a little bit more afterward about the holidays and whatnot. But for now, enjoy.
The Blind Date by Joe Solo.
Cassandra wasn't like most teen girls. She didn't enjoy the same things that the other girls in school did. She didn't chase after boys or dress in the latest fashions. It was a rare sight to see Cassandra wearing makeup on a day other than Halloween. That was the only holiday that Cassandra cared about. She felt that was the only night she could actually be herself. She loved reading gothic horror, curled up in her bed. Her bookshelf was lined with the classics, Dracula, Frankenstein, and Dr. Jekyll, to name a few. The newer romantic takes on the classics made her feel sick and angry. They were taking her beloved stories and twisting them to attract the same people she loathed and escaped into the books to get away from. Cassandra had one person she really would call a friend. A girl 2 years older than her started talking to her in lunch one day. Betty was her name. She dressed in all black clothes and dyed her hair as black as she could. Cassandra adopted her look almost instantly. They shared a lot of the same interests. The only difference between the two was that Betty was interested in the opposite sex. She occasionally had a boyfriend, and the time the two friends shared sometimes was strained. But Cassandra really didn't worry. She would just dive into a book until Betty and her boyfriend were broken up a week later. Betty had a volatile temperament, especially with her boyfriends. None of her relationships lasted a month. One time she came over to Cassandra's house with a black eye. Her boyfriend at the time, Randy, punched her in the face. Betty said she cut Randy with a switchblade she carried at all times. Randy lived a few towns over, so Cassandra never met him or saw him to verify the story. "Come on, Cassandra, a boyfriend might do you some good," Betty chided one time. She laughed it off at the time, but truthfully, sometimes she did think about it. Having someone to share her dreams with, other than Betty, wouldn't be so bad, she told herself. After almost a year of joking around, Betty started to get insistent, especially after meeting her newest boyfriend, Brandon. She had met Brandon on a new goth dating site. Cassandra warned her against it, but Betty argued that the site screens all the people on there. On their first date, Cassandra followed them, just in case, but everything went well. Cassandra, come on. Just make a profile. Then you can see who's on there. You never know. Maybe your future husband is on there, Betty said, applying her black lipstick in Cassandra's vanity mirror. She had a date with Brandon later that evening and was getting ready at Cassandra's house because she could borrow her clothes. Maybe it's not a husband you're after. They have women, too, Betty said with a laugh and playfully tossed the lipstick at her friend. Oh, stop, Cassandra said back. Well, what are you? Asexual? Betty asked. I just think getting a boyfriend is more trouble than it's worth. I don't need some asshole calling me when I have 50 pages left of my favorite book, Cassandra said as she pulled a black lacy dress from her closet. Here, wear this one. It'll make you look slutty. Brandon will love it. I wouldn't want to lead him on, Betty said. They both looked at each other and smiles crept onto their faces. They both burst out with laughter. It wasn't like Betty slept around, but if the mood struck her, then she wouldn't be shy with her boyfriend. It was cool for the guys to sleep with any girl they could, but if the kids at school saw Betty doing it, they would call her a slut. That was probably why Betty dated boys from out of town, Cassandra thought. Betty's phone dinged with a text message, and Cassandra used that interruption to check her hair in the mirror. It was time to dye her roots again. She would have to run out to the drugstore. She heard Betty laugh and looked at her friend. What's so funny? Cassandra asked. Brandon, he's so funny. He asked me if he should bring condoms, Betty replied. You guys have only been dating for like 2 weeks. Jesus, Cassandra said. Yeah, but he's been real good to me so far. He deserves a treat, Betty said in a playful voice and slapped her own ass. You're too much, Cassandra said with a smile and a roll of her eyes. A short time later after Betty left, Cassandra sat in her room with a copy of In a Glass Darkly. It was the 7th time she'd read the collection of short stories by Sheridan Le Fanu. Her eyes kept drifting from the written word to her laptop Betty had left open on the end of her bed. After the 3rd time she sighed and put her book down. She typed in the web address for the gothic single site Betty had used to find Brandon. I'll only look for fun and to shut Betty up, she thought as she began to make a profile. She took a selfie with her cell phone and uploaded it. Once that was done, she browsed through a few men's profiles, looking superficially at them. She grew bored a few minutes later and put her phone down. She looked back towards her book, but she wasn't in the mood, so she popped in the DVD of Ginger Snaps, her favorite werewolf movie. After a few minutes, a ding came from her phone. Betty? She said, picking up her phone, but saw it wasn't a text message at all. It was a notification from the goth dating website. Someone had viewed her profile and wanted to chat. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't actually talk to a guy, could she? Even over the internet, she wasn't sure she would have the confidence enough to talk to someone in that manner. She tapped her finger on the thumbnail image to open his profile, but it instead opened the chat window. Fuck, she said as she saw the mystery guy was typing. She looked at the enlarged photo of him. He had shoulder-length black hair. He wore a black leather jacket in his picture. She looked at the name attached to the profile. Jeremy, 19. He was cute, she had to admit, as she scrolled through his information. Ba-ding! A new message from Jeremy. She tapped on the notification. Hi there, I'm Jeremy. I love reading horror. I listen to goth music and just graduated. You look real pretty in your profile picture. Even though he wasn't there in person, she blushed anyway. No one had ever called her pretty before. Well, except for Betty, but that didn't count. Even her own parents that mostly left her alone never complimented her on anything. What should I say? She whispered out loud as she looked at her phone. She began to type a message, then deleted it. After a few tries, she finally got out what she wanted to say. Sort of. Thanks, you're pretty too. I love horror. She looked back at her message after hitting send. Oh, god damn it, she exclaimed. You're pretty too? What the fuck is wrong with me? She saw that he was typing back to her and she cringed, imagining his response to her. She knew that she wasn't ready to chat with a guy. She wasn't cool like Betty. She wished her friend was there now to tell her what to say. She would probably tell her to send a pic of her boobs. Thanks. What kind of music do you listen to? Well, that wasn't as bad as she thought. He just thanked her. She thought about what to say back. Mostly local music. Have you ever been to the Freezer? She asked. It was a local club that she'd been to. One of Betty's old boyfriends had a band and they went there a few times. Some of the bands she actually enjoyed, except for Betty's boyfriends. They were terrible. The club over on 34th? I'm there right now. Chum Trail is playing tonight. They start in a half an hour. You should come out. She hadn't heard of a band called Chum Trail. She thought about it, but she'd never been there without Betty. She wasn't sure she could do it. She quickly texted her friend to get some advice. Are you coming? Jeremy messaged her. She waited a few more seconds. Come on, Betty, you twat. Message me back, she said to her phone. A minute passed and still nothing. Hello? She felt bad for not messaging Jeremy back, but she was indecisive. She wasn't the outgoing person Betty was, and sometimes she was content just to follow in the wake of her friend. She sighed as she looked at her phone laying on the black comforter on her bed. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore and picked up her phone. She opened the messaging app and started to type to Jeremy that she couldn't make it tonight. But some other time. But she only got 2 letters typed before she received a text message from Betty. WTF, go! I knew she would say that, Cassandra said and let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Okay. She typed it to Jeremy and flinched when she hit send. She could always not go and say something came up anyway. Sweet, I'll be outside waiting for you. Ah, shit. Now she had to go. She jumped off the bed and looked into the closet her and Betty had destroyed earlier to dress Betty up. Now it was her turn. Although she was very apprehensive about going, she had to admit she was excited as well. She fixed her hair in the mirror quick and then put on the black lipstick that Betty had borrowed earlier. 10 minutes later, found Cassandra jumping into her beat-up 1990 Dodge Omni. Her mom passed her in the doorway and didn't even ask where she was going. It was for the best anyway. She didn't want to have to explain. Ba-ding! She looked down at her phone and saw she had a text message from Betty. She looked at it as she buckled her seatbelt. Are you going, bitch? She smiled and texted back. Yes, what the hell? She put her car into reverse and backed out into the road. She headed down the street, towards the club. Ba-ding! She waited until she reached a red light before checking her phone. It was another text from Betty. You go, slut! Cassandra rolled her eyes and smiled. She tucked her phone away before continuing down the street. A few minutes later, she pulled up alongside the curb on 34th Street. She had to park 3 blocks from the club. It must be crowded tonight, she thought. She exited her car and straightened the black camisole she was wearing. She made sure her skirt was in order before heading down the street, towards the freezer. When she got closer, she noticed a line of people waiting to get into the club. Any one of those could be Jeremy. She wondered if she could recognize him from his picture. It was probably some middle-aged pedophile, she joked to herself as she crossed the last street to reach the club. There was no doubt which one was Jeremy. She could pick him out easily enough. He looked just like his picture. Exactly. In fact, he was wearing the same outfit. I wonder if he only has 1 pair of clothes, she thought jokingly. He recognized her just as fast. He left his place in line to approach her with a smile on his face. Cassandra, you made it, he said. Yeah, at least for a little while. My friend said she might need me later. She lied, so she would have an out later if she needed it. Cool, he said. Hopefully you can stay for Chum Trail. Sorry you had to lose your place in line, she said, pointing to the people lined up around the corner. It's okay. I'd rather wait longer hanging around with you than go in there alone. Honestly, I didn't think I'd meet anyone on that app. I just made my profile tonight, actually, just before leaving the house. I was bored standing in line here, so I started looking at profiles and I saw yours, he said. So, do you own more than 1 set of clothes? She asked with a smile. Sure do. I have at least 3 shirts, Jeremy said as they turned the corner. There wasn't that many more people around the corner. It wouldn't be that long of a wait anyway. They chatted as they waited to get in. The line moved slowly but steadily until they were at the door. The doorman didn't check their ID, just asked for the $5 cover charge for entry. The place was a dump. The walls were all spray-painted black, and there were holes in the floor that had plywood nailed down over them, making a tripping hazard just as bad as the hole originally was. Death metal music blared from the PA as opening bands started to set up their gear on the small raised stage. They made their way over to the bar and got some cheap draft beer, then found a spot to talk while they waited for the music to start. A blonde-haired guy pushed past them with a guitar case, then turned towards Jeremy with recognition. Jeremy! Glad you could make it, man. We go on second, he said. Jeremy shook the guy's hand and patted him on the back before turning back towards Cassandra. My friend's band is playing, he said. So, tell me something. Why is a pretty girl like you looking on the internet for dates? He asked. Cassandra put her head down, covering her face with her hair to hide the blushing. She didn't even know how to respond to the compliment. Her mind was momentarily blank, so she hid the fact by taking a drink from her beer. It gave her the extra time she needed to formulate a response. I got on there because of my friend Betty. She kind of bullied me into it. She said I needed to find myself a boyfriend, she said. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, he said, smiling. One day at a time, she said, holding up her drink. They both laughed at her corny Alcoholics Anonymous joke. She had left her phone on vibrate in her pocket, so she pulled it out and saw she had a few messages from Betty. Jeremy looked at her as she looked at her phone. Betty, she's on a date tonight, but is asking me how mine is going, she explained. So this is a date? Jeremy asked. Oh my God, I didn't mean to presume, she started to say, but he interrupted her. Relax, I'm just messing with you, he said. She let out a sigh and visibly relaxed. Are you okay? He asked. Yeah, I'm fine. She turned towards the stage. What do you know about the first band? She asked. They spent the rest of the evening making idle chit-chat between bands and enjoying the music. She had to admit she was having a good time. Betty texted her regularly asking how the date was going throughout the evening. When Chum Trail hit the stage, they moved up as close as they could. Jeremy knew the words to all the songs. By the end of the night, Cassandra was pretty exhausted, but every time Jeremy spoke, it re-energized her for just a little longer. They walked down the street in the cool night air towards her car. Her ears rang from the loud music. Well, here we are, she said, pointing to her car. That thing still runs? He asked. Hey, don't knock Roger, she said. Roger? Don't ask, she said, smiling. Are you really going to leave? He asked. Well, the concert's over, she said. What else is there to do? Well, we could ride over to Johnson Field and walk amongst the trees, Jeremy said. Just walk? She asked. Yeah, just a nice midnight stroll through the park. Unless you want to walk through the cemetery across the street from there, he asked. Let's start with the park. Meet you there? She said, digging her keys out of her purse. You can drive, I trust you. You only had one beer, he said, opening the passenger door of her Dodge. That's because I'm only 17, she exclaimed. Jeremy laughed as he climbed inside. Come on, let's go, he said, closing the door. Cassandra ran to the front of the car and jumped inside. The old engine fired right up and they headed towards Johnson's Field. When they arrived, there were several other cars there. Other couples came out to the park for a private moment or two. I wouldn't be surprised if Betty was there, she thought. It looks crowded in there, she said. Let's go over to the graveyard then. I'm sure it's much more romantic, Jeremy said. Cassandra shivered in the cold night air. Are you cold? Here, he said, pulling off his jacket and handing it to her. Won't you be cold? She asked. He shook his head no and took her hand in his. It was the first time he touched her all night. She was so startled she almost pulled away, but after a few seconds she relaxed and realized she enjoyed his touch. His hand was warm and rough, like a carpenter's hand. They crossed the street and hopped the fence into the graveyard, landing in the cool dew that layered the grass. The light from the streetlights didn't penetrate very far into the graveyard. They clambered their way to a path and followed it in deeper. Near the middle of the cemetery was a big circle of grass with a memorial statue to the town's founder. 3 discolored stone benches surrounded the statue. They sat down on a cold stone in silence for a few moments before Jeremy spoke. From here you can see the stars, he said, looking up into the night sky. You can almost forget you're in a city. It's nice, well, other than all the dead people, she said with a sly smile. Oh, they won't bother you, mostly, he said and laughed. Cassandra laughed too and pulled her phone out of her purse. She looked at the time, 12:18. You don't need your phone out here. Here we can get away from the technology, just for a little while. We can have a person-to-person conversation, he said, facing her. I just wanted to see what time it is, she said, putting it back into her purse. He smiled at her. I didn't mean to sound abrasive. I apologize, he said and put out his hand to shake. She took it, and they shook. How weird, she said. That's me, he replied and stood up. Gotta take a whiz, he said, and walked a little way into the darkness around the back of the statue. She stood up from the bench and wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. The jacket helped her upper arms, but her bare legs had goosebumps. She questioned why she was out in the middle of the night with a strange boy she met online sitting in a cemetery. She looked towards the statue towering over her in the faint light from the street. There were words carved into the stone plaque just below the man's feet. She traced her fingers over the letters before stepping back to read them. Abraham Buchanan, founding member, shot 7 times, and still fought for his country. 1735 to 1794, died peacefully in his sleep. Cassandra vaguely remembered the story of their town's founding. They drilled it into your head in elementary school, but she hadn't thought of the guy in years. She remembered he survived being shot 7 times in a battle, but persevered. That was part of the town's motto, persevere through strife. Jeremy? She called out into the darkness. Are you still there? Yes, I'm here, he said as he emerged from the darkness. He had his thumbs hooked into the belt loops of his jeans. Oh, I wasn't pissing, he said, stepping closer to her. The hair on the back of her neck began to stand up. She didn't know why, but she was getting a sinking feeling in her stomach. What the hell were you doing then? She asked. I had to make arrangements, he said, reaching behind his back. Arrangements? Listen, Jeremy, it was real nice meeting you, but I think it's time I went home, she said, taking a step back from him. He paced her, taking another step forward. She took off his jacket and held it out at arm's length. Here's your jacket. Jeremy just stood there with his hand behind his back, making no move to take his jacket. Don't leave now, Cassandra. It's almost time, he said. No, I have to go, she said, and dropped the jacket onto the worn cemetery path. I have to go home, she said, and stepped back another step. You are home, Cassandra, he said, and pulled a knife from behind his back. The blade was curved about 15 inches long. Cassandra turned to run away, but Jeremy was quicker. He wrapped his arm around her neck and pulled her close to him. Why would you want to leave? It's so peaceful here. Come on and meet the family, he said, dragging her back to the statue. He dropped her on the ground in front of the plaque. Look on that phone of yours and tell me what time it is. It has to be close, he said. Close to what? She asked, her eyes widening in horror. The time I died, of course, Jeremy explained and stepped closer to her. What? She asked. I only took 3 bullets, not 7 like old Abe here. Do you know the story of Abe? Let me tell you what the school didn't. Abe was shot 7 times by British soldiers in the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. They dragged him back behind the front lines and left him to die. Which he should have, and would have, if something didn't intervene. Old Abe prayed to God to save him. He wanted to see his children grow up. He wanted to see his grandchildren. He had a wife and a mistress back home. He wasn't ready to leave this world. It wasn't God who answered him, though, Jeremy said, sitting on the bench within reach of Cassandra. A being came to Abe and told him they could save him. He wanted to live for selfish reasons, so God didn't answer, but a demon did. It promised him a freebie, a full recovery if it brought the demon 3 souls every 7 years. Abe quickly agreed, he explained, and pulled Cassandra's face up to look into her eyes. Are you getting all this? There will be a quiz, he said, and let go. Please, I don't know what you're talking about. Just let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear, she said as a tear dripped down her cheek. He wiped it away with his finger, which was warm to the touch. Don't cry, sweetheart. There's no reason to. Crying is useless. Now back to the story. Abe lived till 1794 as far as anyone knows. That's when his actual life ended. But his deal went on. After his body died, he was allowed to continue to bring souls to the demon, and in return, he could wander the land of the living a little longer. Well, one night in 1988, I just happened to be sitting on this bench here with some friends drinking. A man stepped out of the darkness and asked us for our wallets, he said with a smile. He stood and turned around in a circle, taking in the night. It was right here, at 12:48, that I was shot for not giving him my wallet. My friends all ran and got away, but I laid here, in a pool of my own blood, with 3 bullets in me. I looked up at that statue of Abe there and wondered how he could live through 7 bullets when I was going to die from only 3, he scoffed. Kinda silly, I know. Cassandra looked at her phone. It said 12:43. She started to text Betty. Oh no, we wouldn't want your friend to ruin the party. You see, Abe came to me that night and offered me the same deal he had. And you're my 3rd date this week, he said, swiping the phone from her hands. I can't believe how small these things have gotten over the years. Please, she begged. I won't tell anyone. I'll just go home. I'm sorry. That isn't going to work. I need you, Cassandra. And isn't it romantic? A great night spent together. That's the best part of this job. I get to meet lots of chicks, he said. Just then, there was a small rumble in the ground, and a faint red light started to illuminate the statue. Fissures of smoke rose from the cracks in the ground. He's almost here to take his 3rd soul. I'm gonna need you to lay down on this bench, Jeremy said. Fuck you, she said in defiance. He struck her with the pommel of the knife he'd held in his hand. What a mouth on you. I like your spunk, he said and pulled her onto the bench. He sat on her chest and undid the laces on her knee-high boots. He tied her legs to the stone bench. This is ridiculous, she said, trying to struggle as he tied her hands under the bench behind her back. The rumbling grew louder, and she felt the bench shaking just a bit. Let me go right the fuck now, she called out. Or what? Are you going to untie yourself and escape? It's never happened. Oh, I know. You could try screaming. They usually try that, but it's not going to work, he said, standing back and looking at his handiwork. Cassandra kicked, trying to loosen her restraints, but they were too tight. She called out into the night, Help! Help! Jeremy smacked her again. I really like it when they struggle, but the voices are pretty annoying, he said, and giggled. The rumbling climaxed as a ghostly figure floated out front of the statue. Oh, Abe, look at this one. 100% virgin. Really, it should count as 2, Jeremy said to the ghost. Please, God, don't let me die, she begged.
God doesn't listen, child,
Abraham said in a gravely spectral voice. He floated over to her and bent down near her face. Cassandra could see through Abraham. His transparent body had a reddish hue, but was definitely not solid. Please, she said.
There's no escape for you, I'm afraid. I am a selfish man, and I need you.
The specter said. And I need you too, Jeremy said to her. Is it time? He asked the specter.
It is time,
the ghost of Abraham said, and backed away a few feet from Cassandra. Okay, baby, your time is up, Jeremy said and approached her, putting the knife just above her heart. She struggled harder, but she couldn't get any momentum going. The shoelaces were just too tight. She screamed out. He raised the knife above his head and looked down at Cassandra. Here's to 7 more years, he said, and plunged the knife into her chest. The last thing she saw as the world turned black was the fury on Jeremy's face. But the betrayal from the first guy she ever dated hurt more than that wound in her chest. Well, I found that pretty damn chilling. I gotta admit, as a person who suffers from a degree of anxiety, this story really speaks to me because when people ask me, hey, Henrik, what's the worst that can happen? Well, that's exactly where my mind goes. So I'm like, well, if I meet this girl off the internet, she could be some kind of ghost demon that needs my soul to live forever, who's going to stab a knife into my chest. And then my friends immediately follow up with, yeah, but what's realistically the worst that could happen? And I'm like, well, you didn't ask that. And that's one of the reasons I really like this story. Surprisingly believable characters, a very identifiable plot, and boy, does it dive in to the horror right at the end. And not only that, I think that's the first weekly spooky story we've had that has a not-so-happy ending. mean, unless you're the guy who gets to live forever, although he has to kind of live like an 80s dude for the rest of his life, which is a little sad, but I digress. I hope everybody listening to this is having a pretty good holiday season. I'm having an all right one. I'm a little frustrated, to be honest. I think that maybe we need to talk about Thanksgiving, about the fact that Thanksgiving is the last Thursday of November. Well, this year that meant being like November, I don't remember the date now, but it was like the 30th. So basically, we lost like a week of Christmas shopping and Christmas prep. We had Thanksgiving, and then like 2-3 days later, boom, it's December. How am I supposed to survive that? How am I supposed to handle that? Do you know how hard it is to fit in, Christmas tree shopping and gift shopping and recording Weekly Spooky and working on movies and TV shows and all of that when I feel like we just lost a week? So I'm trying really hard to get into the Christmas spirit myself. And speaking of getting into the Christmas spirit, next week's episode will be our first of 2 Christmas specials, and it's going to be a very special episode. I'm really excited to introduce you guys to it. It's going to be an audio experience episode, which means I'm going to narrate the story, but our lovely and talented music composer Ray Mattis is actually going to do an entire soundscape during the episode, something a little bit different. There'll be music and sound effects and sound design throughout the entire episode, which I'm hoping will give you a big ambient boost. It'll really make you experience the story. So, but I also want to mention, as always, Weekly Spooky is brought to you by Henflix.com. What is Henflix.com? Well, it's my web store where you can buy the films that I make for a living. It's my day job. I'm a film director, and it sounds a lot more glamorous than it is, but I will say, if you want to support Weekly Spooky, one of the easiest ways is to buy anything at Henflix.com, because the money goes directly to me, and it goes directly to keeping the show alive. Or dead. But and if you unrelated, I had a very, very, very massive car repair that I just had to pay for. So Henflix.com would be the ultimate Christmas gift for me. And if you order something from Henflix.com, it ships immediately, so it makes great gifts. We're also supported by Patreon, which you can check out if you go to weeklyspooky.com. You can find out all the information about our lovely patrons and all the ways you can support the show. But on that note, my friends, I've got some gifts to order. I've got some gifts to wrap. I've also got some big furry dogs to pet, and I've really got to get my Christmas card shot for this year, because I have 2 dogs. Last year I only had 1, and it was pretty easy to manage. We'll see how managing 2 dogs for a Christmas photo goes. But next week, like I said, we're going to have a very special episode of Weekly Spooky, and for Christmas Eve, we have an even more special, terrifying, original Weekly Spooky for you all. But until next time, my friends, for myself, Henrik Hutto, and for our producer, Dan Wilder, and our wonderful, wonderful composer, Ray Mattis, I hope you guys have a great week. I hope to see you next time. I'll talk at you later.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.